let's go through the next point on our agenda. Cyera, we will have reset everything in security. Our entire program has been built on the threat and vulnerability and compliance. The business is centered on data. The speakers will be Jason Clark and Lamont Orange. Yes, all right, here we go. Let's give them a round of applause, guys.
Thank you, Robert. Wasn't sure how much more you were going to say. I was like, all right, let's go. And we also have another CISO, so there's actually three of us. We'll each bring up. It's Bob Schuetter, for the CISO for Ashland. I looked at the agenda and said, okay, CISO, it's a 1 hour. It's a 1 hour talking spot, and to me, that's like a movie. So how do we break this up and almost have 3 different TED Talk styles, and then have an open conversation afterwards, right? So the first, to me, the first thing is just introducing myself. Is each other one of us, the other 2 CISOs come up, will just do an introduction of themselves as well. Done nothing but cybersecurity since I was 17, so this is my whole life for now 30 years. Started in the Army, then became CISO for Bank of New York and New York Times and Emerson Electric, and I had a moment of getting my executive MBA and realizing I fell in love with strategy, and I wanted to figure out how to merge security and strategy together. So then I kind of went to what people sometimes call as the dark side, which is I went to want to help vendors build their strategy, but what for the community needed, right? And I did that, and then I went and was one of the original kind of creators of Optiv, built out all their strategy, why we created Optiv, how we named Optiv, and then I ran all the services there. And then kind of came back to, I started a VC, CyberStarts, with, where we created Wiz and many, many other amazing companies. And then from there, went to Netscope, Chief Strategy Officer at Netscope, building their strategy. Lamont owned the security team there. We had about 100 people out of St. Louis where we ran our SOC. So kind of a little bit of strategy, a little bit of security on a constant basis, helping CISOs with strategy, helping the business with strategy, but also just being really ingrained into the pain and the problem of the 3 o'clock morning wake-up calls that nobody wants to get. And so now 30 days into Cyera as their Chief Strategy Officer. And there's a reason, the reason that I joined was I'm all about, I want to solve really big problems. I want to take on the biggest problems in the industry and work with my tightest CISO friends in the world, and I called 50 of them, and many of them here in Dallas, and said, look, like these are the problems I'm thinking about going and solving. This is the angle I have. Like, I want your help. Will you go on this journey with us, right? And that's my ask to everybody here as you hear what I'm talking about. We really just want to help the industry and change the industry together. And I'm thinking about what's the biggest next problem? Well, to me, the biggest next problem is data. It is we've created platforms, SSE, SASE. When I was at Netscope, we have XDR platforms, but there is no data security platform, like true, real end-to-end data security platform. But yet, it's the fastest growing asset for the world. It's the fastest growing asset for every business. It's the fastest growing value for every business. And it's also your number 1 fastest growing attack surface. But yet, like even when you think about your budgets, your budgets are more aligned to, okay, how many more users do we have? How many more apps do we have? How many more locations do we have? I was at a dinner last night where somebody said, yeah, our data has doubled every single year for the last 2 years. Holy shit, right? That's attack surface. And the truth is we've always been, in security, we've always been data hoarders, because we said storage is cheap. And so when you start to look at, you just take OneDrive and look at how much redundant information there is just in OneDrive for all of your company, and how much of that's actually been accessed over the last 2 years, you'd be shocked, right? But that is all attack surface. And these are the things that, like, if what we've never done, we've always chased vulnerability, threat, built security around infrastructure. Even as we go to the cloud, we're hyper-focused on the infrastructure controls of cloud, because that's what we've done for the last 30 years. versus how do we reset and rethink this thing around centering on data, because it's what the bad guy wants, and it's how your business operates, and it is the most valuable growing thing for the business, right? And so that is this premise of how do we reset? Can you answer, where is all your data? How important is all that data? Who has access to that data? What access do they have? And how are they using it? Where's the data going? Ultimately, what is the data risk of every single piece of data, of every single environment, of every single app? What is the actual data risk? Because that's what you should be assessing it on. And that's why we've never been a data-centric, risk-based security program, ever, because we didn't really understand the value of data because it wasn't possible. The technologies didn't exist to do this until now. And that's what our talk's about, is now that there's some inventions where this is possible. In the end, AI is pretty much the number one contributor to that. Wow. We can flip the entire thing on its head and start doing things a little differently and kind of have this perfect reset moment. Now, how did we get here? Complexity. Right? We live in complexity is the enemy of security. Has everybody heard that before? Right? It is what breaks our backs. Right? The business is going doing things. Data is everywhere. We were adding and adding and adding things. But even in our own environments, I spent a lot of time coaching some of the top Fortune 500 CISOs, help them with strategy. It's one of my favorite things I do in the world. And they'll say, oh, yeah, these are all our projects. And it's like, okay, how do they all align to the business priorities? And then they're like, yeah, we have a VPN project. Okay, tell me how that VPN project is protecting data. Oh, well, we're doing zero trust network access. Well, tell me how it's protecting data. No name project after project after project. I'm like, how is data inserted into that thinking? And they're like, oh, well, it's not, because we don't even know where all the data is, and we don't even know the importance of that data, because that's not possible. That's what I hear over and over again. I can name 100 projects. And so, well, shit, like, we're doing this to ourselves. Like, how do we flip the script? I showed that Volkswagen. I grew up in Germany, so I showed that car, and it was a great little car. But 7 years ago, I bought a Tesla. And I have to be honest, I'm a little bored, because I just like cars, and I want a new car. But I can't find myself to buy a new car, because it has 5% of the moving parts of the other car did in the drivetrain. But at 7 years, it drives like brand new, and it's never been in the shop, ever. I get 15 miles less on a charge 7 years later. It still goes 2.2 seconds, 0 to 60. My kids still love it, and I only have to replace the tires. And it's because it's just a lot simpler. Right? It's just a pretty amazing piece of machinery. In 7 years, and I just want us to we have to rethink how we're doing this stuff. Now, next big problem. Why have we never done this? We don't have the visibility. The data's everywhere. It's in SaaS, it's in third parties. How many SaaS apps do most people have? Over 1,000. And probably IT manages 10 or 15 of them. The rest of the business does. The rest your users do. And what data is there, right? And then you start to add mobile, you add all your on-prem stuff and the long scale. I mean, every Fortune 500 I talk to says 50% of our data is on-prem, and it's always going to be on-prem, period. Because of costs, right? Some things make sense to be on-prem. While everybody else is trying to solve just your cloud problem, you also have the on-prem problem. You have to have visibility in a central way of all of this. So this is also breaking our backs. Data flows like water. It wants to get out. You can create a dam. Lamont and I just had a conversation with one of the top 10 insurers in the world. And this is a sophisticated security program. They had an incident, a big one. And they go, yeah, we've basically just blocked nobody can do any attachment to Gmail ever. And this is at lunch, and I'm like, oh, okay. Well, yeah, that was the brilliant idea, because we don't understand the value of our data. We don't know what data matters. And I'm like, what happened? Well, everybody just used all the other email programs. That's what happened, right? And all the other methods to communicate. I'm like, it was dumb. I mean, we do this, and the business wants to go. The data creates more value when it merges and meets with other data. And that's what happens. And we have to find a way to let that go naturally and securely, but without understanding the context of the flow and the context of what that data is trying to accomplish, you can't. And so we create these frictions. I just named an example of a friction, right? I'm sure every single person in this room knows of a stupid control you put in place or a control that's in place that the business absolutely hates and you wish you could go away to. And this exists because of compliance rules or whatever reasons. There are lots and lots of controls we put in place. We over-control because we don't have context of data. So I showed this slide at a keynote at RSA a few years back, and I still love it. And it's just saying, and by the way, I'm not shitting on trailer parks. I actually lived in a trailer park for 2 years of my childhood. But, it's not the best place to live, and it's not the best place to build your, organization structure. And this is really what we've done. I ask people, how many DLP solutions you have? And they'll start with, probably 2 or 3. We'll name them. And then I'll be in there with the CISO and his whole team. Next thing we know, we're at number 12 of data protection DLP solutions they have. And they're not talking to each other. There's no brain. There's no brain to this entire thing. It's just like a bunch of instinct reaction nervous systems firing off. And they think they're platforms because they think that they've integrated them all and they've thrown the data into the SIM. But the SIM is hyper-focused on incidents and threats and IOCs, and it's not centered on data because we've never understood the value and how important the data is. And so what I want to help everybody through here, and the rest of the conversation will be, okay, what is the future? And I think we should be building skyscrapers, not trailer parks. And that starts with a foundation. A skyscraper could never be built if we didn't understand what building and understanding the digging and the physics of building a skyscraper. And that starts with knowing your data. It starts with discovery, and it starts with classification. Both couldn't be possible without Gen AI, and we'll walk through that. So this is a map I like to show of just a data lifecycle. I show this to every CISO I talk to, and literally, they sit there and they're like, this is good. And I say, now let's talk about all the controls you have, and all the products you have, and all the money you have, and what levels of percent of effectiveness do you believe each of your controls are in this data flow? And tell me which ones are actually talking together. When they walk away from this, it's always, every single time, I've done this with Fortune 10s, Fortune 5s, Fortune 1. It's always a holy shit moment. Everything starts with discover and classification. We've skipped that step because it was hard. And I'm going to talk about how it became easier. And then you govern, then you protect, then you control the flow, then you monitor. Right? You're monitoring this, but not just monitoring on flow of data. We do that with DLP, if DLP catches it, but monitoring on the state of changes of risk. So if you have a document that 300 people have access to, and there's no sensitive information in it, and somebody then adds sensitive information, state just changed. If I ask most CISOs, they're like, yeah, we wouldn't even know that. And if I sent that alert to my team, they wouldn't even know what to do with it. They have no playbook for that. This is the conversations I have at biggest companies in the world. Okay, you have us thinking now, right? Responding. I ask the same question. Another question, not the same question. And I'll do this all the time. Okay, say all of your OneDrives for all your C-levels got compromised. And let's add in your SharePoint or Team sites. And it got ransomware and it's $10 million, and somebody says it's $10 million and pay us now, or you're going to be really embarrassed. And I ask, at a dinner table, 15 people, how many of you could answer do you care? Do you give a shit? Or would you be embarrassed? How bad is this? 50% of the room say, we would never be able to answer. We just negotiate down. The other 50% say, we have some resiliency and we have some backups. Some of them will say, we've actually been through this recently. And holy shit, it took us 30 days. And it was the executives who had to actually go through every single piece of data and make those determinations because they had no ability, they had no cheat sheet, they had nothing. Some of them shipped it off and went to e-discovery. My point is, and some of them spent $20 million on this exact use case with PwC. Okay? And it took them 90 days. My point is that most people cannot answer a question about an environment that quickly within 15 minutes, do you give a shit? That's how you should be able to answer. That's the most important thing, especially if you're a publicly traded company with SEC materiality. You need to be able to answer for your own liability. Do we care? And then while everybody's chasing off who's the bad guy, did they get in, are they still in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, the most important thing is, do I escalate this to the board and the CEO because it's do we give a shit? So all of this stuff matters. And then destroy, hoarding. We are data hoarders. Why are we not deleting 20, 30% of our data on a regular basis? Right? Because we're not unable to, because you don't understand the value and the context of the data and who's using it, how often, how frequently. So it all starts with discovery. The biggest thing people miss is the unstructured information. It's the majority of the data. It's not the easiest thing to solve, but it is solvable. It didn't used to be. Now, what changed the game is Gen AI. And I'm going to use a couple examples. I could take a picture of a document. And by the way, I've been in DOP forever. I've deployed DOP forever. I was at Force Point. I drove them to buy a DOP solution and then try to make it good. I was at Netscope. DOP, was a really, really big deal for us because it was such critical to have the controls everywhere. But if you don't understand, DOP just tries to do scoring. So the difference of trying to take a document and run that through DOP versus sending it through a Gen AI, or even something as basic as ChatGPT, because the Gen AI built for security is different. But let's just take ChatGPT. I think my voice went back, all right. If you took a document and you took a picture, or a couple pictures of it, and sent it to ChatGPT, it will tell you who wrote it, the context, what it's about, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I could take a picture of a menu of a restaurant, and DOP would be like, it's a menu. This would say, it's a good restaurant, it's a 4.4 rating, here's the pictures of the food on Yelp, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They have open seats. I can do the same thing for a blueprint. I show this blueprint because nobody in the world knows what this is. And I'm like, send that through your DOP. And then send it through ChatGPT. Ask it what it is, right? It'll tell you. Draw on your whiteboard when you go home today, or on a piece of paper. Draw on your whiteboard, and if you have a DOP, do this. Write down like, hey, strategic imperatives. Either write your security strategy, or write, make it fake, okay? Or write your business strategy. Make up a bunch of fake acquisitions. Acquisition A, 1, 2, 3, 4. Write the numbers of how much you're willing to pay for those acquisitions. Take a picture of it. Send it through your DOP. Then take a picture of it, send it to ChatGPT. And you'll be blown away by the answers. It will know. And it will add context, because it knows the internet, and it knows what's public and what's not public. Imagine having a Gen AI solution that's focusing on data that uses those same basic traits of the context. This changes the game. And now you can understand value of data, which means now you can understand calculate risk, which means you can actually do zero trust, because zero trust is not about zero. It should be about, how do I gain trust back? How do I go from 0 to 10 or 0 to 5, right? Because you shouldn't just be zero trusting everybody and everything. So another visual of this is, imagine there's one little block of data here. Let's call it a sensitive document. You can't see it. It's buried in all these blocks. And then you start by adding context. Imagine you do this for every single piece of data in your company. You discover and you classify using Gen AI. Then you say who has access, how much access, and how are they using it. Then you say, all right, the storage. What's the posture of the storage? It's the infrastructure components that we've always done. How safe is that thing, where it is, and how is that changing? And then where is it flowing, how is it going, is it safe, what's the target, what's the source, where all is it? And then you draw conclusions. Imagine doing that for every single piece of sensitive information in your entire company as it's created on a regular basis, right? And then you drive that to inform what I'm calling kind of a risk-based monitoring, it's a data risk monitoring and response solution. You understand the state of data change and how do you respond to that. So this is not a SIM. This is not a SOC. This goes to your data risk guys, your data protection guys. This goes to your GRC guys. And this goes to the security operations guys. Because each of them have different workflows and recipes for how they should act on this. But this is not happening today in 99% of the world, right? But this is very, very possible. And so this is kind of a dream that I have with these 40, 50 CISOs I'm talking with. And they're like, this is what we all need. let's go build this for the industry. And that's what I'm trying to do at Cyera, Cyera's Chief Strategy Officer, is they've got a big part of this. They've also have $400 million in the bank to go build the rest of this, which, by the way, is like more money than, I would say, 99% of all security companies in the world, right? And only 10 other companies in the world have that much money in security. And that's to go spend to build something amazing for the world. But it all starts because of some invention they had around data classification discovery using Gen AI. And so I'm not going to get into this. There's a whole bunch of frameworks here that if you ever want to follow up and go on this journey with us and want to engage and want to talk, I'll walk you through how we do this and how we do this for your security operations and how we integrate into everything. Because you don't need to replace all your DLPs. What if we just tapped into them all, right, and made them all better? And we were the brain, and they were just senses. It was a sense of hearing, the sense of smell, the sense of touch, the sense of taste. And I'm taking all that stuff, but I'm giving you the conclusions of one view of actually what's happening to your data in an understanding of how important that data is. And so I want to create a world where you guys are less stressed, where you're centered on data, centered on the business, and simplicity is the ultimate form of sophistication. And we've overcomplicated this stuff. I do believe we can simplify and use the stuff you already have just by rethinking the way we do this. And my last statement here is, I view strategy for security as really, really easy. And so the first thing I do when I talk to a CISO, and they're like, Jason, okay, you're a chief strategy officer, you do security strategy for CISOs, and you do strategy for businesses, And I'm like, guys, security is really easy for security. It's know your data. How well are you at that? Well, okay, yeah, we're like a 1 out of 5 or a 2 out of 5. I'm like, all right, the most important thing you're the least mature at. That's not good. Okay, that's step 1. Step 2, reduce the attack surface. They tell me all the things they're doing for reducing attack surface. A lot of it's vulnerability management. A lot of it's firewalls, et cetera, et cetera. I'm like, but data is your fastest growing thing. Come back to how you're reducing attack surface for data if you don't know where all your data is and how important it is. Third is complicated unauthorized access. Fourth is rapidly detect and respond and contain incidents. That's great. I think people have maturity there, but they're not with data context. And then fourth, align to your business priorities, right? You do those 4 things, you execute that. Everything you do in security aligns to this. You can have an overarching operational efficiency if you need to save money. That wraps around it all. But this is what a security strategy is. Everything else wraps into this. So with that, I would love to bring up Bob to just double-click on some of these concepts and go much deeper on the LLM stuff.
No, I appreciate it. So my name is Bob Schuetter. I'm CISO for Ashland. It's a specialty chemical company, right? So think manufacturing, industrial areas. Before that, I was CISO at GE, which is now called GE Aerospace. Every company I go to seems to be broken up into multiple smaller pieces, but that's okay. But got my start really in the defense industrial base. Back in 2007, when the government first knocked on the door and introduced the world to this crazy idea of hacking. Right? I just happened to find myself in the right spot at the right time. And ever since then, I've been absolutely infatuated with security. So, there we go. So one of the things that Jason talked about is, so let's dream. Why is now the right time to start talking about let's flipping our models? Right? Why is now the right time to actually start getting into how do we actually do this for the business itself? The SEC, and Jason brought it up, asked a simple question. Is this incident going to be material? I've never seen an industry go into a tailspin so quickly over that question, right? Because it's really, really hard. And that's the reality of it. I think, Chris talked about it before, AI is going to be an important piece of all this. But it's not quite where I think AI, everyone's head is at, oh, we're going to replace analysts. We're going to get automatic detections. There will be some of that. I think one of the most important things and most interesting things about AI, and especially generative AI, that is going to change the world, is this understanding, and Jason kind of hit on it, that it can infer things. Right? So we show it a whiteboard, and it can infer what the conversation was about. That's an interesting piece. When we looked at LLMs, large language models, the wild piece of it is we didn't start with rules. We let the model itself figure out the rules of language. If we can figure out the rules of the English language, which is one of the hardest things to actually figure out, even for people, certainly we can do one more thing. If we have enough data, if we have enough understanding of our data, where it's at, the context of it, if we can start to look at data flows, where does this data go from and to? Who is it generating it by? Is it a user? Is it an application? Right? Think about this. We've got 3 data flows coming into one central point. One has orders, one has inventory, one has formulas. And out coming from it is instructions to 12 different manufacturing sites. What do you think that thing is? It's probably a scheduler. It probably is taking in orders. It's probably figuring out what inventories are, putting things together and telling the manufacturing plant what to actually do that day. Right? If we can get that type of visibility from an LLM, the LLM can actually start to infer what that does. It can start to talk the language of our business. And that's really what I think is missing right now. Right? That's one of those pieces that from a dream perspective, that's why I think is going to change the world. Because our security posture has always started with the business. Right? Otherwise, we could just outsource it. It's generic. Right? Every platform out there loves to work in the generic space. We all patch criticals and highs. Why? Because that's just what we do. Right? But if you actually had the full understanding of the business side of it, through the data flows and through the inference of what that means and what that is doing for you, we could actually get much more specific about what we're detecting, why we're detecting it, right? The intelligence about threats, how we're setting up DLP, how we're setting up firewalls, you name it. So throughout the time, if you ever kind of watch the evolution of both the GE side of it, the defense industrial base, we've always dreamed. So I've got an entire team, I don't have the normal security team. My entire team is looking for what gets past commercial products, right? We can show you how effective every single platform and vendor we have is and whether it's actually getting better or worse over time. I hate to tell you it's getting worse, right? We can show that through the separate like marketplaces, the price, the pricing within it, the supply and demand curves, right? The bad guys are outpacing what we do. So to get ourselves out of this kind of thought process of what we're solving based on what my current vendors can provide me, we come up with this idea of this, we call it either the 3P model or the perfect model, right? What would you need to do to actually build the ideal cybersecurity program for your company? Well, one, we need perfect visibility. So we actually capture every platform, every process on every platform, every data packet into and out of the company, every email, every instant message, you name it. Right? If you had full visibility, that's awesome. Most of us don't. And as you're going into SaaS and cloud and all that type of stuff, we're actually losing more and more visibility into the world as we do this. So how do we make up for it? Right? The second piece of this, though, is let's go to the right. The perfect knowledge of the threat. If we understood from a threat intelligence-centric perspective, we could say, okay, who's attacking us? Why are they attacking us? What are they after? How are they going to get in? What's actually exposed out there? Right, back to the vulnerability piece. Every critical doesn't necessarily need to be patched. Maybe it should. Is it exposed? Is it a part of our important pieces? Is it actually connected to the rest of our business? Right, we're missing context. But if we had perfect knowledge and perfect visibility, we still, as business leaders, have to come back to this one question. How much should we spend? How big should the cybersecurity team be? How important is it? Because we, as Jason said, we can't just lock down everything. We tried, right? So we created one of the first big cyber vaults in the world. We were a defense industrial base. We knew how to work with top secret data. So what we do, we put all of our important information, all of our sensitive information into this cyber vault. We had two-factor authentication. We had VDI before Citrix was a thing. And what did we find? we actually made the problem worse, right? Everyone kept a copy in the vault, but also put a copy on their laptop, because that's business, right? So understanding that business process has to be the foundation of what we actually build. It's going to tell us what we should spend. How much profit do you want to take off the company? Because you are spending money and it is taking profit out of our banks to ensure, right, the risk. We don't have a true risk model yet. We have a lot of good, posture management systems, but it's for one individual piece. What I would claim is we actually need a full company posture management system that's actually trained on our company, not a generic framework, right? And you do that through understanding data flows, right? Data flows you can infer business process with, and business processes have value. It's not just the intrinsic value of the data, right? PII didn't have value until GDPR came through and said, oh, by the way, there's financial penalties to it. We can actually center this within the business itself. So, the question of the day that I think the opportunity for us, if we dream big, is really what our CEOs and our board members keep on asking us about. I think Chris said the same thing, right? My CEO actually told me, Bob, you use a lot of big words. What it means is I use a lot of technical speak. They don't want to hear technical speak. Right? They want to hear, what does my actual business process, the thing that I actually create revenue for, my highest profitability, how exposed to risk is that? Because we have to protect that piece of it. Right? I'm willing to spend $10 million on this piece of it if I can separate everything else from it and spend less over here. Right? That's really what we're all about. We're trying to determine risk. Where should we spend money? Where shouldn't we spend money? If you look at the types of things that we can put around it, though, data context is everything. Data lineage, who created it? Where did it create it from? Is it automated? Is it human interaction? Right? If you think about a ransomware response plan, how many of us really know, do we have backups? That's one thing. But you know what? If it's a process that's gone through applications, do we know that, oh, by the way, you could just regenerate that data and send it back through because they didn't take this, we still have this, we could just regenerate it through that application and pop out the other side with the same answer. If we had this type of data flow understanding, we could actually do that type of stuff. Our responses become more intelligent, right? Our understanding of impact becomes very, very specific to us, and not just that we had a big event. Not just that we had a ransomware and should we pay or not, right? It is what the industry is looking for us to do. And we talk about data kind of age, time frame. I would challenge you, can you tell me right now, just show of hands, because I've never asked this one before. Show of hands, do you know what percentage of your data is actually used in operations and production right now? Anyone have a guess? Because I actually just did this with mine. What's the guess? Oh, cool. Do you have a frame of how much data is actually used in production day to day? 75%, 50%, 25%? Wow, that's actually phenomenal. Mine was an old company, right? Lots of divestitures. Mine is 3%. 3% of my data is actually used in production day to day. Everything else is in storage. That's partly legal, that's partly all this other stuff because we divested so many times. That's the question of the day. If I lose all that other stuff, should I even recover it? If it's not used in day-to-day production, guys, I'm wasting time actually trying to get to the real result. Okay? So with that, we'll bring up my friend Lamont to go a little bit more, less dream and more into reality for us.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Bob. I'll give you a little bit of an introduction to myself. My name's Lamont Orange. I'm the current CISO for Cyera, former CISO from Netscope, former CISO from Vista Equity Partners and Vista Consulting Group, former CISO of Spectrum. Everybody loves Charter, right? This was a great place for me when I was at Spectrum. And I'm former senior manager in Ernst & Young's Security and Technology Solutions. So I thank you guys for welcoming and talking about the problem a little bit. Jason talked about the problem. Bob framed up the dream. I'm going to talk to you about the disruption that is actually in some of our programs, something like GRC, and how this can actually help us. Let's see. This is a great picture around what we've done with data. We've gone from you can't use it to yes, but you can use it this way to that's all you can do unless you come into my enclave with my device, with my controls, and I'm going to MFA you to death. But you can get access to certain amounts of data. We've talked about the idea of that data living in this enclave, but also living on these devices. And we all know data has intrinsic value. It has a value to our companies if it's used appropriately. We want to monetize it. We want to drive the business forward. It also has value to the bad actors. But what we've done in this example is we've made it increasingly hard to unlock that value. We've governed the heck out of it, and we don't know the risk of what we're actually protecting with this data. I like to call it governance, risk, and compliance. In many talks, you've probably seen me say big G, little r, big C. Now I've just striked through the risk because I don't think we've ever really got to the point of the concentric circle of where we can use the data and where everything meets. And it's simple. It's very simple. There's 5 things that we're really concerned about at its heart and at its core around privacy and security. We want to make sure we can use it. Appropriate use by systems, appropriate use by our companies, departments. Even from security standpoint, we want to know the appropriate use. We want to protect the data. We've been doing data security for 25 plus years, and data is still somewhat secure. We brought DLP in, and I'll be the first to say I brought DLP into all of those companies. Very marginal success around DLP. We get to what we know, and we never get to what we don't know because we don't have that deeper context. When I was at Spectrum, we got to the best PCI program ever with the DLP, big program. But I never got to all the other data aspects. It was hard to get to the other side of the production database. It was hard to get to the structured databases. We want to know how fast we can respond. Jason's example of, do you know what was actually impacted? What was actually accessed? We've all seen the disclosures and the breach notifications where the first 72 hours, nothing was touched. We're 100% confident. The next 72 hours, this was touched. And then the next 72 hours, let's rotate all the passwords and be okay, just to make sure, because we didn't know. And it took us so long to get there. We focus a lot on threats. I think every program has threat, has security intelligence, so much of that stuff right now, but we have no data intelligence. We know everything that's hitting us from a 0 day, but no data intelligence around what we have, what's our asset, what's our attack surface. And the reasons we do some of the things we do to make it difficult, very good reasons. Laws and regulations. In the United States, how many privacy laws do we have? Think about that. How much risk are we trying to protect with all of these different data elements we have? If you're a global company, how many international regulations and laws do we have? We've tried to do common control frameworks and all of that stuff to try to minimize the risk. We've done the most restrictive and said that maybe that's one solution that'll fit them all. But we get to the same point of over-restrictive. You can't use it. So many different friction points. And by all of this complexity, we do make it more difficult to actually do our jobs, to monetize our data, innovate. Every company wants to do more with less. That's all part of data. Data monetization. I'm pretty sure everybody has a use of data in their company and being pushed by the organization to say, I want to know what this is. If you're an advertiser, I want to sell more to this segment of our consumer base. Or I want to know what we're spending so we can get more efficient. But I think what we're really trying to get to, we're trying to get to where the concentric services overlap. You want to be able to respond to a breach faster. For the GRC teams, absolutely want to understand the risk. If we do have a breach, we want to know what was impacted. That's great. big bucket over here. But if there's a million records in that bucket, and there's only 5 records that was actually impacted, that's our risk. We can't get to that. We have to go with the most restrictive. We want to understand how we can do vendor management. The data lineage part, very important. Where does it go? Third parties, fourth parties. Where's that data? And we have the opportunity to look at this when we talk about how we've dreamed and all the problems we've been solving for the last 25 years. I like to go back to risk for a moment. In my career, I think risk is a dirty 4-letter word as well. We've used it as a weapon. We weaponized risk. We made the company do things that they didn't necessarily want to do because it was risk to the organization. We understood the threat, all the different actors, all the different attack surfaces. We didn't understand the impact, though. We never really understood the impact. It was impact to systems, impact to services. It was never impact to data. Data is the oil. It's the currency. And now, if we look at the onset of Gen AI and what we're able to produce with this context, if we go along this dream and along this journey, we can actually get to true risk for our organizations. That would be a novel idea. From all of the organizations in here today, again, I want to take a little bit of a show of hands. How many of you have a risk program? And that's expected, most of the room. How many of you will say that the risk program is so complicated that only security understands it? And when you start getting in some of the legal aspects of it, it makes it very hard to implement, right? And very hard to take it back into terms of the business, that this is the risk to the organization. And we have lots of different models. We have Monte Carlo, we have FAIR, we have all of these different aspects of how we do risk. I think going back to complexity, we have overcomplicated risk, and more importantly, we weaponize risk. So now we have to get back to a point where we're actually focusing on what is the risk to the organization. Data is our currency today. We fought endpoint, we fought firewalls and infrastructure because data was hard, and now I think we have the opportunity where our GRC programs can actually communicate proper risk to the organization in business terms and what processes that it affects. Data classification is key to understanding the risk. Bob said 3% of his production data, old company. Well, when you have the other large percentage, a vast amount of data that could go away, that's huge. That's a cost saving for your organizations. When you have new companies that are very modernized and modernizing in nature, how do you do it? How do you figure out what that data classification, all the data that you have? Most of us will say that's resource intensive today to figure out, right? And we all have unlimited resources. So we can get this done. We've been doing it for quite some time, right? I see the heads shaking no. That we don't have unlimited, that we haven't been able to do it well. So now we're in a point where using AI technologies, you can get that classification very rapidly. You can get beyond what you know, which is what we know is what the regs and standards tell us. PCI tells us what to do. The privacy rules tells us what to do. Those are the other ones. But what about the blueprint? What about the whiteboard session? What about what's in Slack, Teams, Zoom that could be very important to our organizations? Or maybe it's not. But we don't know what we don't know because it didn't fit the policy. So we need something that's going to classify it across all of our spaces, not just what we do in Microsoft, not just what we do in Google, not just what we do in all the other different platforms. We need a unified solution there that has the same context, the same rules. And I think that moves us to a term where we can actually get to business enablement. When you look at security programs, that we need to be aligned with the business. We said this, CISOs need to understand what the board is actually asking for. We want to innovate, we want to enable our businesses, but we've all hit that wall of what enablement means. And like I said, as I started, we started in the overly restrictive. We went to don't use it unless it's in my device, in this enclave, in this space. We can't unlock the value. And then we moved to somewhere in the middle because we want to be business-centric, business-aligned. That was our definition of enablement. And we said, yeah, but do it this way. I think we need to change the paradigm now, and we have the opportunity, as we're focusing on data, to change that paradigm to let's use the data. And no buts, but we have to have the context. That'll actually remediate and remove some of the opportunities for disclosures and breaches if we have the context and we know where it is and know where it's going. Because being overly restrictive, it hasn't helped us. Being in the middle, maybe we had some marginal success. I think it's time to change and flip this on its side and actually help the business to use the data versus helping them not to use the data. And I think the paradigm shift really talks about a movement. It moves us from this governance. We've done governance very well. We have policies, we have procedures, we have standards, but we didn't understand risk. So now we can move from risk identification. We can actually bring the R back, make it a capital R, bring the entire word back with no strike through, and say we understand the business risk to our organization. And that's just a simple formula. We know what we're protecting. We have knowledge and wisdom around how the business uses this data and how the business would like to. And hey, we may even be able to suggest, use it this way. We already know that we can govern. We're strong there. And I think Bob made a point with the 3 Ps. Let's make informed decisions. And then we get to truly enabling our business and showing value. Everybody wants to show value in their security program. I had many CFOs a couple companies ago say, hey, security, you got the best job ever. You burn money. I can't tell you no. I don't want to tell you yes, because I don't want to be that person. But I need you to show me some value. When you have the data aspects and you're aligned with the business in that way, you tell them exactly what they're doing with the data, how they want to use the data, and being a suggestion of how we can take this data and make something else out of our business. Even if it's monetizing and working more efficient, more effective, you're protecting that data, you're understanding the life cycle, and you're understanding the capabilities of what's possible. So I think that makes sense, right? We all want to be enablers and show the value. So with that, I think that we have a few moments, because data is a tough subject. We have a few moments where we can invite some questions within the audience, because I like participation as well. And I can bring my other presenters back to help me answer those questions. No questions? Everybody's good? Yes, sir. Mr. Roberts.
I might as well be the protagonist in this. Oh, there we go. You're awesome.
I like it.
I might as well have a little bit of fun. Okay, so I'm actually going to go back to a point you just made about value. And I've had this conversation with CFOs before, and to me, I've probably done it blunter than most, which is, A, did you wake up this morning and did your computer work? Secondly, were you able to walk into the office this morning? Thirdly, were the little blinky lights working? Fourthly, is your spreadsheet working? Fifthly, are you on the front page of the newspaper? If the answer to all of those is affirmative and you can get your job done, congratulations, I've shown value.
I agree with that, but that's the commodity. We can always say yes to at least 90% of those questions. But when we get into the situation of talking about where our data went, we had a breach, we had an unfortunate situation, the blinking lights and all that stuff doesn't matter anymore. It's how much risk or how much is this going to cost me? And if you had told me, you get this question often, if you had told me that this was only the $100,000 that you wanted to spend, and you were very clear, you weren't clear that you needed to spend $100,000 to save this double-digit $1 million for us to clean this up. So we move from in favor to out of favor very quickly when we look at it as a commodity service.
Charles Aguirre, so I'll ask the question. So one of the questions I ask is, do you have insurance for your car?
I do.
Do you have insurance for your home?
I do.
Do you have insurance for your business? Do you have life insurance? All of those, what is your risk on those? So when you're investing in security, you're investing in insurance for your company.
There is a paradigm and a philosophy to doing that. I'll use the insurance analogy. I have insurance, but it doesn't want to pay. I have insurance that also tells me I'm contributory negligent. because I didn't do the things I was supposed to do. So I think it goes hand in hand. There's this equation of we have to do the right thing and not rely on insurance. If insurance is your de-risking solution, then it's not going to be successful because there's always a way out and you're still left holding the bag because you had contributory negligence. Well, if there are no other questions, oh, there's one more, Robert, one more.
I'm on my way.
He's moving.
Thank you. Just thinking through the scope of everything you guys are trying to accomplish, are you building partnerships? Do you have like channel partners and things to help with the integrations and stuff? I was looking on you guys' website and I couldn't find anything right off, so just kind of curious about that.
Great question, and I'll answer it. And the answer is yes. We do have partnerships with channel, but I think there's even more, one important partnership that that I want to talk about, and that's the partnership in this room with all the practitioners. I've worked for quite a few product companies. You heard it in my introduction. The one thing that I think is very valuable when you work for a product company is to get the input from the practitioners, get those design partnerships, get those requirements, because if it works for you, it's going to work for all of us in that way. And I would say many companies, vast number of companies, don't do that. They don't have a mechanism to really execute on it. They're very rigid in what they want to do. So not on top of the channel partnerships, we invite everyone to understand and spend more time with us and look at our strategy, tell us where we're wrong, tell us where we're right, tell us where, you guys are out of your mind. You'll never be able to do this. We haven't been able to do it in 20 years. That's great. That's the challenge. But what we're trying to do is make it better. Community effort makes it more simple than us trying to do it by ourselves. So that's what this is really about. Data security, data governance, access governance, it's all of our issues. So let's solve it together.
Let's give Lamont a round of applause.
Thank you.